This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Hey, this is Brian Peña. I always join the Vito podcast, the best podcast in the United States.
And welcome to the latest, the freshest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I am your host, Vito Jerome Chirco, alongside my usual sidekick and broadcast partner in fun. That is the DOC from Doc and Jock, John Charles Macaroon. John, how's it going?
Vito, we don't need 15 years to tell you that you're a Hall of Fame member of the podcasting community. I always have to recognize the work that you do in terms of bringing big guests to the network, doing your work being the sales rep. You do a great job here at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. You even let me in on your feature interviews as your co-host and sidekick in fun. So as a guy that definitely respects you greatly in terms of you being a journalist and a valued member of the DSP family, I don't want to wait too long. And listen, if we could retire numbers or retire microphones, yours would be the last to be retired. Look, after Jason, after Adam, after Jerry, after Steve, after my wife, after Blair, after
everybody else you can think of right now,
after Dom, after
everybody, all those guys can go first.
After all the guests, then I think you would have your turn and you would get your recognition that you deserve. And I always want to let you know that.
Oh, God, I love that. So complimentary of me, and I'll get my time to shine and be enshrined one day here at the DSP Network, and always fun chatting about baseball with you. And the latest and greatest is that Alan Trammell finally is in the Hall of Fame, and guess who else? Jack Morris, one of the biggest game pitchers of all time, the winningest pitcher in the 1980s. Alan Trammell, the 84 World Series MVP, the should have been 1987 American League Most Valuable Player as well. Never got that Most Valuable Player award in his career. And that's why I believe he was left out of the Hall of Fame from the Baseball Writers Association of America for 15 straight years on the ballot. He was grandfathered in to stay on it for 15 years, as now the length, by the way, is 10 for everybody. So he got lucky to get 15 years on the ballot. Still didn't get voted in, though. It didn't matter for him. Finally voted in. I mean, this guy's a middle-aged man now. He could have been voted in how long ago, realistically? 10 years ago, Doc. He could have been voted in with this WAR, and when you compare it to Barry Larkin and Ozzie Smith and even Derek Jeter, Derek Jeter's WAR is comparable to Alan Trammell's. It's better than Tram's, but Tram's is right up there with the best of the best shortstops in terms of WAR and should have gotten in a long time ago.
Yes, we're going to talk about this throughout the podcast, and we did talk about it on the last episode, but now the enshrinement has happened, well-deserved for both gentlemen. Before we get to the featured guest, who is the guest this week again?
Nathan Bierma of Detroit Athletic Company. Now, guess who else writes for that? I think you know who. Yours truly does write for that. Okay. Also handles a great Twitter account. It is at Tigers History. Lots of great Tigers history on that Twitter handle.
The one thing, though, that we got to discuss is, okay, I don't know how you feel about it. I'm going to tell you how I feel. Now, the enshrinement happened. Alan Trammell, Jack Morris are getting the proper credit that they deserve, right? And immediately it comes out from the Tigers organization, per Chris Ilitch, that in August, the Detroit Tigers are going to honor Jack Morris and Alan Trammell by finally retiring their number. So it sets forth the precedent that now we kind of know what the Tigers and Wings are kind of looking to do in terms of their requirements to honor their own. And what they're looking for is that they won't basically retire numbers unless the person's a Hall of Famer. And I find that to be disgraceful, because how are you going to have Alan Trammell, Jack Morris be part of a ceremony, retire their numbers, and then leave Lou Whitaker out of it? What's the deal behind that? You really think that you have to wait for a voting system? You have to wait for whatever entity to acknowledge Lou Whitaker and what he was able to do? I mean, basically, you've told me that Lou Whitaker's WAR is right up there with those that are already in the Hall of Fame. His numbers are very comparable. He's a worthy candidate. And whether or not an outside entity values you or not, who really cares? The 1984 team was a team for all ages. I mean, I was only 5 or 6 years old, but people that talk about it rave about the 1984 club. It's a special club that started 35-5. We're able to win the World Series. We're able to do a lot of great things for the city. And in the sporting community, they're revered. So what the Tigers are saying is we need the outside validation from the Major League Baseball writers or people that don't respect you or value what you do as opposed to New York or other big markets. You want validation from them as opposed to validating your own. It's ridiculous. Everybody that's in the know, all reporters, all podcasters, people like you, they know that Lou Whitaker's number should be retired. What the hell's going on? Why have the Tigers taken this awful stance? I can't imagine that this ceremony actually takes place without Lou Whitaker. It would be a travesty and something that people will talk about. I feel like it should happen all at once. Boom. What do you want to do? Space it out into 2019 as attendance drops because of how god-awful the team's going to be?
Well, you know what you can say. Now, there is a stat out there about WAR. We all know about WAR. Well, the stat to bring up regarding Lou Whitaker is that his WAR outweighed everyone else's WAR on this modern baseball era ballot of the guys that were on the ballot, including Alan Trammell. Lou Whitaker being left off of the modern baseball era ballot in itself was a travesty, let alone, having his number already retired by the Tigers. His number 1 jersey should have already been retired a long time ago and should be getting retired now with Trammell's and Jack Morris's number 47 in August of 2018. Whitaker deserves his time to shine, to be enshrined at least by the Tigers with his jersey number being retired. It is a travesty that he only lasted 1 year on the Baseball Writers Association of America ballot as well, not garnering enough of the votes. 5% of the vote is what you need to stay on the ballot as you go along. Well, he didn't garner 5% of the vote in his first year on the ballot and was left off in future years subsequently, and that was a travesty right then and there too, Doc.
You can debate it, but what's up with the Tigers? Why don't they show love for their own? I mean, literally, Vito, that would be like me saying, look, Vito, you got to be validated by the ticket before I acknowledge what you do here for the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. They got to put you on air before I tell you how great you are and what you contribute to this fine project. You think I would ever let that happen?
No, because you know what I've done? Like, the Tigers have known what Lou Whitaker has done for ages. He's been retired for how long? Since 95, he's been retired. Trammell and him formed the longest double-play tandem in Major League Baseball history from 77 to 95, and you can't retire the guy's number, a guy that could field and hit for power, too, as his playing career went on, and he got later into his playing career. The guy deserves to have his number retired. The thing is, Trammell and Whitaker, even Morris, they deserve to have their respective jersey numbers with the Tigers retired a long time ago by the Tigers organization. So it's a travesty. I keep bringing up that adjective, but it's a travesty. These guys' numbers weren't retired a long time ago. Like a decade ago, these guys' numbers should have been retired. And guess what? Jack Morris's number 47 hasn't been worn by anybody else in the Tigers organization since he wore it himself. So Morris, he could have had his number retired a long time ago, and all these guys should have had their numbers retired at least a decade ago, in my opinion, Doc.
So use your rational brain. What's the deal? Why hasn't it happened? What's the deal with Lou? Is it because of the fact that he was a little bit ornery? Because of the fact that he was a little bit standoffish with the media, that he wasn't a guy that was approachable, wasn't one of the guys, he didn't answer the questions, kind of was a little bit standoffish from all accounts in terms of how he treated the media? I can understand that, but that's not your job, is to judge how a person treated you in terms of whether or not you vote him in the Hall of Fame. But what 1 or 2 reasons would you think the Tigers would not honor this man and retire his number?
Not being media friendly and not always standing up for the national anthem. Do you remember that? He wouldn't always stand up for the national anthem.
Oh.
And he had a bad rapport with the media. The media didn't always like him. So I think he got a bad rep. And subsequently, these voters from the Baseball Writers Association of America, they didn't vote for him enough to stay on the ballot after 1 year. And I guess maybe it affected the Tigers organization too. So I think it comes down to that, his lack of media friendliness and not having that great media or rapport with the media in the past when he was a member of the Tigers, Doc.
Okay, Vito, I'm interested to see what your guest thinks about the news of the week regarding Trammell and Morris and the absence of Lou Whitaker in terms of how the Tigers have treated him. Let's get your guest on the line, Nathan Bierma, right after this.
Doc, and as all of you listeners hopefully know, the Detroit Sports Commission is one of our fine sponsors at the DSP Network, and since 2001, the Detroit Sports Commission has applied its expert touch to marketing and to selling the Metro Detroit area as a marquee destination for regional, national, and international amateur sporting events. And through the Detroit Sports Commission's help, these events have attracted thousands of visitors and pumped millions, and I mean millions of dollars into our local economy. It is why Detroit is now not only the place where champions are made, but also the place where championships are played. To find out more about the Detroit Sports Commission and all of the events they are bringing to our very region, please follow the DSC on Twitter and on Instagram at DET Sports. And make sure to check out their fine website at DetroitSports.org. I am now joined by Nathan Bierma of Detroit Athletic Company and a great Twitter handle in @TigersHistory. by the way, Nate, I love following that Twitter handle for all these Tigers news and notes from the past. As you know, I'm young. I'm only 24. I don't know everything about the Tigers from the past, so it kind of keeps me informed, and I really appreciate that you do that for all those Tigers fans, including myself, out there.
Well, thanks, and you're not the only one. Half the reason I started the feed was to educate myself, and I have learned a lot, I'll tell you that. Well,
so we got to start off by talking about these guys from the Tigers. It was like a Tigers-only ballot from the modern baseball era ballot. Only, two former Tigers getting voted in via this modern baseball era ballot in Alan Trammell, this great shortstop from the Tigers, the 84 World Series MVP, the should have been 1987 American League Most Valuable Player as well, and Jack Morris, the winningest pitcher of the 1980s, both finally getting their due and getting enshrined into the Hall of Fame as a part of the 2018 National Baseball Hall of Fame class. What was your initial reaction, Nate, when you found out on Sunday that those two were finally voted in?
I was surprised. I was delighted, but I was surprised because I did not expect both. I expected one or the other, and I thought it might be Marvin Miller also getting the call. But one of the reasons I didn't expect both of them to get it is they're two different kind of candidates. Jack Morris, more the old school candidate appealing to an old school voter. Alan Trammell doesn't have the lights out moments that Jack Morris did, like when you look at the 91 World Series. But he appeals to those who look at advanced stats. And so I didn't think that the same voter would vote for both players, but they did, and it's just a real thrill to have two Tigers from the same team, and at last that 84 team gets recognized by the Hall of Fame. They were notable in being a championship team and not having a Hall of Famer, and now they have two, and they should have three. We can talk about that. 2 years from now, one of their teammates should join them.
I hope Whitaker does get in. I mean, Trammell and him formed the longest double play tandem in Major League Baseball history, so he deserves to get in eventually. We'll talk about that in just a short few here on Tigers Talk with Nathan Bierma of Detroit Athletic Company and of the great Twitter handle at Tigers History. Now, so I want to ask you, I mean, finally getting these two players from the 84 squad, it seems like to me it validates the Tigers as one of the greatest teams in Major League Baseball history. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, before Sunday, I would have said that it doesn't take Hall of Fame validation for that to be true. Certainly the 35-5 start, which is the best 40-game start in Major League history. And just the fact, there was something to the fact that you had a team that was so dominant that didn't have that one superstar who rose above all the others. And so you could say this was a team to the core. And they reflected the character of Detroit somewhat in that way, too. They didn't have a diva. I mean, Jack Morris had his moments when he wasn't the best team player in the clubhouse. But for the most part, they banded together and put together just an unforgettable season. And so, yeah, after 15 years when both Morris and Trammell aged off the ballot, I would say, well, fine. If the Hall of Fame doesn't want to recognize them, we know how great that 84 team was. But now looking at it to say these two guys are going to be on plaques, and again, hopefully more to come, it just, when you look back at it, it raises the accomplishment of that team and that season to a whole new level.
Now, Nate, who would you have voted in from the modern baseball era ballot?
I got to say, I tried to follow Jay Jaffe, his book, The Cooperstown Casebook, and his writing at si.com. I can't say that I'm a total stat head, but I do try to follow the analytics arguments, and so I thought Trammell clearly belonged by the numbers. I didn't think the numbers were there to justify Morris. I was convinced by Jaffe's analysis that voting for Morris would be for the wrong reasons. I would have definitely had Marvin Miller. Beyond that, I can't say that I analyzed the remaining candidates carefully enough, but if I had to cast a ballot, it would have been for Trammell and Miller.
And now it seems like, Trammell and Morris paid their dues on the ballot for 15 years, Trammell getting grandfathered in to stay on the ballot for 15 years, with the Baseball Writers Association of America never voting him in. Because, neither of them got the 75% of the vote from the Baseball Writers Association of America. Lou Whitaker now has been snubbed forever and ever, being on the ballot for only 1 year, receiving 2% something of the vote, not the 5% to remain on the ballot. And that was a travesty in itself. And then the Modern Baseball Era Committee leaves him off of this Modern Baseball Era ballot for some odd reason, when I believe the stat is that he actually garnered more WAR throughout his Major League career than anybody on the ballot, including Jack Morris and Trammell themselves. So, I've got to now get into this with you, your article that you wrote, and it is titled 8 Bad, in parentheses, bad is, Reasons Why Lou Whitaker Gets Snubbed by Hall of Fame Voters. And you penned it for the Detroit Athletic Company blog, a site that I also write for. So I wanted to ask you, how did you end up writing this piece for the DAC blog. And what does it specifically entail for those that haven't had a chance to read it yet?
I wanted to round up the different explanations I'd seen for why Lou Whitaker was one and done in the 2001 ballot and was left off this ballot. I've seen a lot of theories out there, and after a while I thought, there's so many theories that the sheer number of them suggests that nobody can settle on a single explanation for why this is happening. But I just wanted to kind of collect, and in my piece I linked to all these different articles where these different writers say why they think that Whitaker got the shaft. And again, I want to be very clear that none of these reasons is good enough to explain why Whitaker got shut out. But I just want to say what is going on, because there are many who think that he's just clearly a Hall of Fame second baseman, and by many measures, one of the top 10 second basemen of all time, if not top 5 when you look at wins above replacement. What it boils down to, I list 8 different reasons that I found, and your listeners can check it out and see each of them. But I think what it really boils down to is, first, his personality and relationship with the media. The media never really warmed up to him, never knew exactly what to make of him. I linked to some articles that have convinced me that race was a factor there. It was a factor in how a mostly white press failed to warm up to his personality or understand his personality. The media seemed to think he was aloof and think he was arrogant, which doesn't seem to be fully true. He was eccentric and he could be withdrawn, but I'm not sure that his personality was read the right way by the press. And so, and now you could say, hey, Jack Morris certainly had his run-ins with the press, but he seemed to know where he stood with the media and vice versa, and that doesn't seem to be true for Whitaker. So that has nothing to do with baseball, but that certainly plays a huge role. First with the writers, and now with the committee that chose the Committee for the Modern Era ballot. They're either validating the results that the writers had in 2001, or the same problem is happening all over again, where Whitaker's personality, they just don't warm up to him. But the other baseball-related reason that a lot of these other explanations boil down to is he never stood out from the pack, and this was true from Whitaker too. They both did, or for Trammell too, they both did a lot of things really well, but they were never known as the best at a certain thing. I mean, they were the best double play combo, but Jason Stark, in explaining his omission of Trammell back in the early 2000s, or actually a couple of years ago, Jason Stark said, Trammell never led the league in an offensive category. And a lot of us would say, well, so what? I mean, he was a contributor on so many fronts. From fielding and hitting, and with Whitaker, you have to add his base running. They did so many different things well, but they never stood out. They never got that batting title. They never had a home run title. Trammell came very close to the MVP in '87. Statistically should have gotten it, but didn't. And so a lot of Hall of Fame voters say, well, the Hall of Fame is for the elite. There are 4 players who reached those magical milestones of 3,000 hits, or had an MVP or 2 or more, or stood out at something. And with Whitaker and Trammell, they were so good at so many things, but never separated themselves from the pack. And ironically, you get punished for that versatility. But happily, these results suggest that is changing, that the voters' willingness to look at Trammell now and validate his many different contributions, that will extend to Whitaker, and just the fact that Whitaker was a double play partner with Trammell. Now not only do you say, well, he's in the same mix as Hall of Fame second baseman, you can say he has essentially the same career and even better stats than new Hall of Famer and double play partner Alan Trammell.
And now here's a snippet really quick from your piece on Lou Whitaker continuously being snubbed by the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And in this snippet, you quote Keith Law. And it says here, when I reached out to several voters recently to ask about Whitaker's failure on the ballot, I heard the word uppity used to refer to his character, which unfortunately is a word only applied to people of color. To me, that is very, very telling, Nate. And something that, God, that is just ugly if that is the case, which, we're taking it at the word of Keith Law as being the case from at least some of the Baseball Writers Association of America voters.
Yeah, I cringed when I read that, and immediately I thought, I hope it's not as pervasive as he suggests, and there have to be other explanations. There have to be other theories on the list other than that, because it just was so painful to read that. But Keith Law is a very responsible writer, very well connected. And I fully believe what he says. And in retrospect, I think it's true. Again, not necessarily that race was in the foreground of how voters thought about him, because clearly voters elect African-American candidates all the time. But what law says is that there are those candidates, both white and black, who get along very well with the media and have a very easygoing personality and relationship with them. And then those that don't, if there's a racial difference, that just compounds the problem for the player and the candidate. If it just adds to the disconnect. And so it was hard to read. It's hard to think about. I don't doubt it, especially when you think of the lack of diversity back in the 80s in the press. But again, looking forward, I'm hopeful now that all these other factors will recede and that the primary factor will be Trammell is a Hall of Famer. And on any objective ground and certainly on sentimental grounds for Tigers fans, there's no sense in having one be a Hall of Famer and the other not, and I expect that to be corrected in 2020.
Okay, because I was going to ask you now for your bold prediction. Does Lou finally get into the Hall? So you are saying yes.
And it's hard to know for sure without seeing the ballot, but one of the great things that happened, in addition to the fact that we got two Tigers in the Hall of Fame, is we have two new slots open up on the ballot. There was a real fear that no candidates or no players would be elected because a committee hasn't elected a living player since 2001. Ironically, it was Mazeroski, to whom Morris is compared as sort of a statistically weak Hall of Famer. But in any case, so now there's more room on that 2020 ballot. There was a big outcry, not just in Detroit, but nationwide, that Whitaker should have been on that ballot. And so that, combined with the fact that Trammell's in, and that will be leverage for Whitaker to certainly finish very strong, I think to appear on the ballot, to finish very strong. And at this point, I think there's a good chance, based on this vote for Morris and Trammell, I think there's a good chance that Whitaker will join him.
So, Nate, really quick, how much did it hurt Trammell's case with the Baseball Writers Association of America that he didn't win that Most Valuable Player award in 1987 when, statistically, you look at his WAR specifically, he should have won it? And then when you look at Jack Morris in his case, how much does his ERA of 3.90 for his career, how much did that hurt his chances, you believe, as well, of getting voted in the past?
Well, first of all, with Morris, the thing about the ERA was that was the criticism that analytics-minded voters, that one of the metrics that they used to point out that Morris was statistically flawed. But the old school voters who were defending Morris said, well, he had the grit, he had the guts, he had the competitive fire, he had a lot of complete games, he had a lot of pitcher wins, which of course is a problematic stat for an individual candidacy. And so I wasn't sure that the old school voters were looking at the numbers closely enough. But yeah, that high ERA is now the highest ERA in the Hall of Fame. It really does stand out. I'm personally glad to see Morris get in, and I think his candidacy is defensible on some grounds, even though it's statistically flawed. But yeah, ERA is one number that really stands out. For Trammell in the 87 MVP, our colleague Dan Holmes at the Detroit Athletic Company blog wrote a piece on that about a week ago, breaking down the case. And yeah, it was a big problem, especially what I always look at when you think about the 87 MVP is Trammell's stats, certainly his wins above replacement, are about identical to Barry Larkin, who was inducted, was it 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. And so if Barry Larkin is in, statistically, there's no reason for Trammell not to be in. But what sets Larkin apart? Well, he won the National League MVP in 1995. And so he had that MVP on his resume, and Trammell didn't. And I do believe that played a big role with voters for those 15 years.
Yeah, I think Trammell would have been voted in. If he would have won that MVP in 1987 when he should have, I really, really believe that he would have been voted in.
I agree. Yep. And I think Trammell has even said something to that effect maybe, but it certainly loomed large in the minds of voters.
So, Nate, now looking at the Tigers on the playing field going into 2018, not much to be optimistic about, so I leave it to you now to let my listeners know about what is there to be optimistic about the Tigers on the playing field in 2018.
Well, the thing to be most optimistic about is on the history beat and looking at old Tigers. So we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the 1968 World Champions, celebrating the 80th anniversary of Hank Greenberg hitting 58 home runs. And, oh, by the way, we're going to be celebrating a couple of new Hall of Famers. So there's a lot of good things happening in the past. that we'll be celebrating in 2018. But I got to tell you, I mean, you can call me just a rosy optimist on this. I think it's possible that the Tigers overachieve this coming season. I think they underachieved under Ausmus. I think Gardenhire is the kind of manager who could get more out of a roster where I thought Ausmus got less than he should have. The absolute best case scenario would be to sneak into a second wild card the way the Twins did this year, where this past season, the only the playoff teams in the American League had records above 500. If that happens again, the absolute best case scenario would be that the Tigers nab that last spot. Of course, that would hurt their draft position, which is their primary objective. They're not trying to contend in the near future. But, if we see the Ian Kinsler trade go down this week, that opens up a starting spot for Dixon Machado. I'm really excited to see him. I'm excited to see if Norris can bounce back. Hopefully Fulmer will bounce back from injury. We won't see a lot of the real young studs coming up through the minors quite yet, at least not some of the top prospects. But it is going to be a young roster. Gardenhire will be whipping them into shape, I think. And I think it's possible that they're better than we think, even though for the first time in a long time, we're not seriously looking at the World Series or the playoffs.
So would you take the over or under on 75 wins out of the Tigers in 2018?
It's tough to say, especially this early, and I hate to cop out on you, but 75 could be about right. I think I might have to say low to mid 70s would be the safest bet. But right now, because it's snowy outside and I miss baseball and I'm thinking positive thoughts about baseball, today I would take the over very, very cautiously.
Nate, it's time to be optimistic. When you see the snowfall that is coming now as well, and, in Michigan, it can just happen at any point in time, and can be a lot of it. And, for me, honestly, though, I see 70 wins. I would be happy with that out of the Tigers. And as you said, it's more important about the Tigers getting that number one pick or that high draft pick in not only next year's draft, getting the number one pick already, but in the following year's draft, getting that number one overall selection as well, or number two or number three pick in the Major League Baseball amateur draft.
Yeah, and I credit the front office for being very honest and for saying, look, we are not going to take shortcuts. We are in for the long haul. We're in a rebuilding phase that will take more than one season. And if they do contend for the second wild card spot, it'll be something of an accident, and it will be something of a disadvantage for the draft. But the front office is looking long term, and they're not hiding that fact. And they say they have a plan, and they seem to. And so it's time for patience. And like I said, it's good that in the midst of what could be some lean years, we're going to celebrate some big historical milestones.
Nathan Bierma, I'll let you go with that. Thanks for all the time, and we will chat again soon here on Tigers Talk.
Thanks, Vito. I enjoyed it.
Back here on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company, and we just had Nathan Bierma join us from DetroitAthleticCompany.com, a shameless plug for myself, as I also write for that site. Good to have him on, a colleague of mine on from the DAC blog for the first time in the history of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. The doc obviously is always here, even if I like it or not. He did choose to be here. So I got to appreciate him and respect him for that, though. And we talked a lot about, really the whole entire segment with Nate, about the fact that Trammell and Morris get in, Whitaker not even on the modern baseball era ballot. I mean, how much of a travesty, how big of a travesty was that in itself? Whitaker simply being left off of the ballot, not even having a shot at getting into the Hall of Fame via that ballot.
I do believe that, the level of respect for the 84 Tigers is now starting to turn around because of the fact that as history goes on, when you look at that 35-5 start, when you look at what the Tigers were able to accomplish, it's a storied team. And to have Trammell and to have Jack Morris representative of it, it may be due to the fact that, like people have talked about, Lou Whitaker's, grumpiness with the media, his lack of willingness to play the game, quote unquote. But in the end, Lou Whitaker, if he asks himself, he knows he's a Hall of Famer. He knows what his numbers have done, and you don't want to cheapen it. Look, if the baseball writers don't vote you in, so be it. It is a travesty. Most people that discuss it as a travesty, and I'm hoping that Lou Whitaker, through other channels, if they're created, maybe will get his opportunity to be recognized. But at the very least, I think what's more important is the Detroit Tigers need to honor him by retiring his number. Get off the schneid, take a stand for once, and do what's appropriate. Go out there and retire this man's number. Show him the respect that he deserves. He's done a great job for your organization, and don't wait on outside entities to validate what he's done. And you definitely need to honor the man, and most people will say the same thing.
And now I know that I've been honored in another form, not as a Hall of Famer, but in a weird fashion. And can I announce it to the masses on this podcast
Very
too?
weird. I know you walked in all happy earlier on Tuesday.
And I announced it to you right away when I walked in.
So you're the one that obviously gets the mail here at the office, and you came in all happy. So we don't know if we got a super fan outside of Steve that sent this to us, but tell us about the award that was sent in the mail to the Detroit Sports Podcast Network offices.
I was recognized as the Universal Little Person Association Sexiest Little Man Alive for 2017. As you said in your tweet about it. Not sure if this is real or not, but whoever sent it to the office, thanks, I guess. A creep out there? Who sent this piece of mail to me? Now, I do like being recognized as the sexiest little man alive. Now, I think actually that title should belong to who? Peter Dinklage. I mean, I think he deserves the honor before
I don't know who that is.
From Game of Thrones.
I'm not a Game of Thrones person.
Okay, so I'm not either. I even know that. Now, guess what? Have you ever watched Elf?
Yeah.
Have you seen the little person in that? That's Peter Dinklage, too.
Oh, okay.
He's funny in that, but he takes on serious roles, too. He's a really good actor, by the way. I believe he's won awards. So, man, if I could just be that guy one day with those accolades that he has, well, he has them as an actor. Maybe I'll get them as a podcaster, writer, maybe as an actor, as a who knows what it will be down the line one day, Doc. But still a great honor, a weird, a creepy honor at the same time, but I will take it for what it is worth. And I've got to thank the big man upstairs, I guess, for my decent looks.
Unbelievable, Vito. Before we get out of here, we do got to check in with some Tigers news. It's been reported, and I guess it's going to probably happen. Ian Kinsler, 2017, probably might be his last with the Tigers. Very heated conversations. Al Avila's come out and said that names have been exchanged as well. So it's looking like Ian Kinsler won't have to worry about what number he's going to wear. Being that he wears a number that's going to be retired, he doesn't have to worry about it. But at the same time, also talks in the winter meeting heating up regarding Michael Fulmer. I do want to get your sense of those rumors, but I want to bring up something that I said to Jason in a recording of the Motor City Sports Rant podcast. If Miguel Cabrera gets off to a great start in 2018, let's say 15 home runs, 80 RBIs, and he's doing some things at the trade deadline, and he's smashing the hell out of the baseball, he's healthy, is there a scenario in which maybe if 2018 is a good year for Miggy, it's his last year with the Tigers? Because wouldn't that be the trajectory because of the fact that his ability to draw big names coming back, even with the salary, if a couple teams need a hitter and he's the last piece for two ball clubs to maybe win a World Series, maybe a Boston or Yankees or Dodgers or other big name organizations that have big funds, if he's the last piece, the last cog, do you see a scenario in which any of the thoughts that I just explained could happen next year?
The only way in which he starts smashing the baseball again is if he actually starts to not smash women, not named his wife anymore. If he starts to get away from that tendency in his life and that bad habit that he has of smashing women not named his wife, wow. I think he'll be all right. I'm going to go that far. I try to be funny. I think it was a little bit funny. I think I maybe hit a single there, but I don't think you're going to see him at least get out of the gates and just start smashing the baseball once again in 2018. I don't think you're going to see that out of Miguel Cabrera. I know it's great he's working with LeBron James as trainer right now, so it seems like he's actively committed to getting better at the plate and to showcasing more of the skill set that we saw out of Miguel Cabrera pre-2017. And trust me, I hope for that to happen myself as a huge Tigers fan. But am I optimistic that it will actually occur? No, and hell no, out of Miguel Cabrera in 2018, Doc.
Okay, I can validate that. What do you think about Ian Kinsler? Talks are heating up. Probably there's a chance within the next 5 weeks or so he won't be a Detroit Tiger.
Well, Anthony Fennick tweeted this out from Al Avila. Asked for his level of optimism that a Kinsler trade will get done at some point. Avila said, I think it will. We all know at this point, Kinsler's tenure in a Tigers uniform is not for the long haul any longer. It's not going to last much longer. I think possibly even past the winter meetings. And it's not about if he will be dealt at this point, Doc. It's about when he will be dealt. So maybe they drag it out. Maybe they deal him right before spring training, or maybe they deal him mid-2018. But I think he won't even be a part of the 2018 Tigers Major League roster because they will deal him prior to the start of spring training, actually.
Dealing him prior to the start of spring training. Okay, all you can do is really look at this rebuild. Very interesting podcast, sir, looking at Alan Trammell and Jack Morris. Finally, they get their due. I enjoyed the conversation with your guest and always enjoyed talking baseball. What do you think is upcoming in the next couple of weeks? What should I focus my attention on?
Well, I've got to talk about a beef that I have regarding Giancarlo Stanton being dealt to the New York Yankees. We'll talk about that in a future week's episode of Tigers Talk, because now here's just something really telling. A headline from the Washington Post about the trade of Stanton to the Yankees. It says, Giancarlo Stanton's trade leaves Yankees standing tall and Marlins reduced to rubble. Once again, as they were under the ownership regime led by Jeffrey Loria. Once again, it is the same case with Derek Jeter now calling the shots along with majority Marlins owner Bruce Sherman. It's an ugly look PR-wise for Jeter and the Marlins franchise, dealing Stanton away basically for nothing in return. Lower-tier prospects in Starlin Castro, a guy that is a major leaguer, who the Marlins just might flip for something else to save further money, and they're going for broke. They're trying to be cheap as possible, and it's all about saving some money. Even a few dollars there in Miami, that is their intent. That is what they're doing actively, and it is sad to see that from afar as a Tigers fan, seeing that happen to the Marlins organization, which has been reduced to rubble how many times now, where they've had these huge fire sales.
This is bad.
Very bad. And even after they won in 97, remember who was the manager back then?
Jim Leland.
And then he managed a team that won, I think, 54 games the following season in 98 because they dealt off pretty much everybody of value from their major league roster. And it comes down to this now. I know Jeter is new at this, but what the hell are you doing, Jeets? Giving a franchise player, a once-in-a-generation kind of slugger, to your former employer in the New York Yankees? Not a great look for Derek Jeter to start off his tenure in the Marlins front office.
The optics are terrible. A lot of people had commented nationally, locally, there in Miami. They said, look, Jeter basically bought the Marlins with other people's money, and now his first dealings with a major league organization is with his former team, the Yankees. People were saying things like, oh, that's just Jeter being a Yankee doing his thing over there in Miami. But unfortunately, you got to tear it down. But
for that, not to tear it down in that manner.
Yes, arguably, the league probably could have stepped in and said, look, the imbalance is ridiculous. Nowhere near the level of talent returned back for the likes of a Giancarlo Stanton. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely nothing else to be said on this week's edition of Tigers Talk. Much thanks once again to Nathan Bierma of DetroitAthleticCompany.com, the blog for the DAC that I write for as well, and of a great Twitter handle in @TigersHistory. Follow him on there via that very Twitter handle.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciated.
Adios.